Okay, so I'm going to do a breakdown of this one right here and show you how I made this giant castle structure. I actually modeled everything in this one as a challenge, and I'll show you my approach for that and how I broke it down piece by piece to not make it so overwhelming when you're creating a full castle. Yeah, so let me actually start by talking about how I got this castle here in the first place from an empty file. So it starts with this. I'll just show you this really quick. So this is my modeling file. So I actually did this in two separate files. One of them was, well, this is actually a cleaned up version of it. My actual modeling file is a bit more messy with kind of random pieces scattered everywhere, but this is basically a cleaned up version of my modeling file. And I'll break this down to like the actual bare minimum level that I can in a minute, but I'll just show you kind of the loose pieces here, and then we'll go a level deeper after this. So I have all these pieces here, which I've made, well, piece by piece. And I've done that just by looking at reference images of other castles. When I say reference images, I just mean like other pictures that I've found on the internet of castles that I think are cool. And I'm just using those pictures, looking at them as I'm modeling, going back and forth, and then just using that to help me stay on a very specific path so I can end up with a specific outcome that I want. So I'll actually open up my reference, like my mood board file, and show you where these are coming from here right now. So in one of my recent videos, I mentioned that I actually don't like doing this very often, if at all. I've been building like a huge mood board with tons of different castles, and that's true most of the time. But I think if you're going to make a giant castle scene like this, or something really, really complex with so many little intricate details, and you're trying to model it all yourself, then yeah, it probably makes more sense to actually have a full mood board of different styles that you want to incorporate. So anyways, this is mine. And you can see the direct influence here. Like if I zoom in, you can see where some of these pieces are coming from. And that's how I kind of broke it down. So I looked at this image here. I went, okay, I'm going to make something quite similar to this tower right here, just this little thing. And I'm going to focus on that only for now. Just go and do that, and then make that one piece, and then take a break if I need to. And then by making this one chunk of pieces right here, you actually get a whole bunch of different pieces, which I'll show you in a second. You get like all these different little archways and rooftops and trim pieces and things like that. And that, it makes it actually much easier as you go along, because each chunk of pieces that you make, each little tower or cluster that you make, will give you like a few different random little smaller pieces that you can use moving forward. So by the end of the modeling session, you have like a ton of little pieces that you can just reuse and basically put them together in different ways and create new models. So let me show you exactly how this is getting broken down. So this, you might look at this and find this intimidating, and you might think, how the hell do you model something like this? Well, it's not as bad as you might think, and I'll try and show you that right now. So if I bring this out here, I'll just duplicate this this way. Let's just go to solid view, and right now it's one object. And if I go into edit mode and I just do, I'll just select everything. You don't have to do this. I'm just going to do this as a demo. If I separate this by loose parts, so if I just do this, it's going to separate out all of the loose disconnected pieces. So every single one of these chunks right here would have been a separate object that I added with Shift A and then choose one of the meshes as I was modeling. So if I just set the origin to geometry on these pieces, all of these different colors here are different actual objects, and then I just join them together with Control J at the end. So you might still be looking at this and going, what the hell, how am I supposed to do this? This is so much work if you look at a full castle and you just go like, how the hell are you supposed to model every single piece? Let me try and break this down actually to one more level. What I'll do is I'll go in here. Again, you don't need to do this. I'm just doing this as a demo. If I turn on this setting, affect only locations, that means if I hit S to scale it up, it'll kind of just explode out the castle. So I'm just going to scale this up around there. And what I'm going to show you is if I zoom in here to any one of these pieces, you'll actually see that no one of these pieces is really that complicated at all. So if I take this archway, for example, if I just take this and I isolate this, if you look at this right here in like wireframe, I'm guessing that you could probably model something like this pretty easily if you had to, right? If you were sitting there and you had to figure out how to make this shape or something very similar to it, you could probably do it. And same goes for these are actually all duplicated. So this, and this here, same piece, just rearranged, just shrunk down. So if you can make one, you can make this. Same thing like with these pillars. I'm sure that if you had to model this, you could probably do something similar to this, right? If you had to make this, you could probably do it. Okay. And same thing with this here. This is a very simple one. It's just basically a cube that you stretch out and do a little bit of random bevels on the side. Same thing with this piece. Might look a little bit more complicated, but you know, if you were sitting there and you had to make something like this, I bet you could probably do something like this. You'd probably figure it out in 5 minutes or whatever, right? And if you didn't figure it out, you could probably look up a modeling tutorial and watch some guy make something like this and figure it out pretty easily. And I didn't even do that good of a job. Like, this is pretty gnarly topology here that I wouldn't recommend copying. But the point is, if you had to get this shape roughly right, you could probably do it. And so that means that you're actually probably capable of making this entire thing, which means you're actually probably capable of making the full castle. Like I said, as you get going and you start modeling one piece, there's actually not that many different unique pieces coming together here. It looks like it is when I explode it, but if you actually start looking at, okay, how many unique different pieces are there here? There's not that many, right? There's a pillar, an arch, there's a roof, a couple small like random things which aren't as important to get extremely right because they're kind of just small details. Something like this you might not know how to do, but again, there's ways around that when it's just a small little detail. But you know, there's a pillar, arch, a little trim piece which could be simplified as well. I'm sure you could figure out this roof. I'm sure you could figure out this like octagonal shape here, or something similar to it, even a simplified version. Another arch, Gothic. These, like when you look at this, it's just like, this is like a pointy cube. Excuse me, a pointy cube. This is just a regular stretched out cube. So is this. So are all of these are just cubes stretched out. This thing here looks a little bit complicated maybe, but again, I'm sure you could figure out a way. Like if you look at the basic shape and figure out, okay, what kind of shape would you add to start this off? Probably a cylinder, and then probably shrink the top, and then probably add some loop cuts and do some insets, and then just kind of go through and figure out how to add some details here and there. And before you know it, you'll have a bunch of small pieces that you put together. Obviously, you wouldn't do it like this. You would try to model it in the actual shape of the thing instead of doing it all splayed out. I'm just doing this as like to show all the different pieces kind of disconnected. Anyways, if I bring this back together, I just leave that there. You just have to make basically one side and then repeat it. Just duplicate that whole chunk to the other 4 sides, and then, or the other 3 sides, and then this thing's getting repeated hundreds of times. That archway thing is getting repeated a ton of times. There's some square things to fill in the corners, like this. You could definitely make that. And no one of these pieces is that hard to make. It's just when you're looking at a big thing, it's like a bit overwhelming. So if you can try and break it down into more manageable chunks, it'll become a lot more clear how you might end up with something as complex as a full castle. So what I've done is I've just modeled all these pieces here, and then what I'll do when I'm modeling is I'll probably just duplicate out little pieces like this and kind of just save them off to the side, and then that way when I'm working on something else over here, if I just put this thing over here, right? Say this is my other second building. I can just go, I need a roof on this. Oh, I already have one. Let's duplicate that. I'll just put it over here, and then I can just kind of plop that on top of my new model, and there we go. And then, I need an archway. Well, I've already got one that I made, so I can put that over here too. Just grab this, right? And there's my archway. And then that's kind of how I'll end up modeling by the end of the scene pretty much. Just by taking the small little pieces I've already made and then just repurposing them into other things. So it's quite difficult at the beginning of the modeling scene when you have nothing and it's just empty. But by the end of it, it's a lot faster. It's a lot smoother. You're already kind of in the flow of things, and you already have a ton of other pieces to work with. And then you can even take these bigger chunks and combine those into even bigger chunks and kind of repeat that again even. And so that's how you end up with a full castle. So that's I think all I'm going to cover with the modeling. I will just show you again the textured view. They're all simple textures. Like I'm sure you could figure out probably how to get a stone material onto something, and then same thing with a roof material. These are all like free textures. I think these are actually all from Polyhaven. I'm not like they're free. I'm not affiliated or anything. It's just go to their website. You can download these free from their stuff there, or whatever website you want. And then just figure out how to like assign that to different parts, how to put a texture on different faces on the same model, and there you go, right? There's not, if I go to the shader editor, there's nothing unique happening here. It's just literally base color, normal map, and roughness map on all these. In the final castle, I did mix in some other grunge and stuff, but for this, yeah. And you can see how after a while, when you make all these little pieces, it becomes much easier to make something bigger by just taking these little chunks and kind of just, repurposing them into a bigger thing like this. So if we just do this, rotate this 180 degrees, right? And at a certain point, you might not even need references for this because you're just kind of in the flow of things and you kind of know what is going to work. And there you go. We've got another little thing there, right? Okay, so that's it for modeling. Let me show you the actual castle scene now, and we'll get into a bit more of the actual scene here. So if I go to render view here, this looks like a big step up from where we just were, right? But I'll try and break this down again into these manageable chunks. So a lot of these, pretty much actually every single one of these pieces in here is just the pieces from that modeling file. I didn't do any new modeling for the castle. I'm just bringing in those old pieces that I already made and just modeled these little chunks and then brought those in here. So if I go here, for example, that should look very familiar. That's the thing we're just looking at, of course. And that's just one piece in here. That, like, different variations of that piece are getting repeated all throughout here. And so it's like I'm taking this thing, taking this thing, taking that lower half of it, separating that chunk out, and that's something I can reuse throughout here. And that's in a lot of different places in here, right? So a bunch of these little towers are just that piece kind of repurposed. That rooftop is kind of just repurposed. Geez, I can't talk. Repurposed a bunch of times throughout this whole thing. I made one wall, and that wall gets duplicated over itself again and again and again. And you just have to do it a little bit strategically and just place it in ways that you can't tell exactly that it's the exact same piece repeated thousands of times. That's easier said than done. It does require just kind of fiddling around with it a little bit more than you might think, but it's a hell of a lot easier than trying to model a full castle from scratch. You know what I mean? Like, I find that if I break it down to individual manageable small chunks and model those, that's a lot easier than looking at this and going, okay, let's just model that, this whole thing at once. It's like, that's very, very hard to do. And I don't actually know anyone that does it that way. Anyways, this still looks very complex, right? Because there's all these different loose pieces here. But if I go to top view, hopefully this will really show you that this scene wasn't that difficult to make after the modeling, especially. If I look around here, there's these little chunks of kind of clusters of models throughout here. So I actually just made this one and then duplicated that one chunk. I just parented a bunch of these models to one empty. So they're all individual objects. I can move them all around individually, but they're all parented to an empty. So if I want to move this chunk around, it's really easy. And I've taken that chunk and I've actually duplicated it a bunch of times throughout the scene as well. So I'm kind of, it's kind of this like fractal of duplicating chunks over itself. But you can see here, if I go to top view, if you just pay attention to this layout, right? We've got kind of like an L-shaped wall, some buildings in a certain layout. If you just look at that shape, it's actually repeating a lot throughout here over itself. And you can see where those different chunks are lining up there, where it's pretty much the same cluster duplicated again and again, just with a few pieces rearranged into a different layout. So it's not like visually, it just doesn't look that much like it's repeating that much, but it is. Look at this tower right here. So we've got this central piece with a bunch of towers on the side. That's over here as well, duplicated on the left side, the right side, and down here as well. And then that same thing, right? So you can see how once you have a few different pieces to work with, and if you don't want to model everything yourself, that's fine. You don't have to. You can download packs or buy packs or whatever, but if you're going to model it yourself, you can do it this way. But you can see how once you have a few different pieces to work with, you can combine it in so many different ways. Kind of like, I kind of think of it as, I used to play with Lego when I was younger, much younger, like a little kid. And I kind of think of it like just digital Lego almost, where you have all these little pieces And there's infinite ways that you can recombine them into different creations. Yeah, anyways. So I think that's all I wanted to talk about for the actual models and the layout and the structure of this thing. And hopefully that shows that it's not as insane as it looks. There's a lot of Shift D happening throughout here, even with the smaller chunks of houses here. You'll probably notice a repeating pattern in these kind of clusters of houses throughout here. Like this is probably similar to this, which is probably similar to this, just rotated 90 degrees, and this, and that's kind of how you build the whole city, you know? Yeah, and you can see it's kind of just getting placed in the line of sight of the camera as well. Okay, let's move on to the lighting just really quick. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it's actually quite simple. So we have a sun lamp, which is doing 95% of the lighting. If I hide this sun lamp, you can see it pretty much all goes away. There's a couple of random spotlights in here, which are just highlighting very specific areas, which I felt weren't bright enough. But the sun is doing all the lighting there. Now, there's more happening than just that. You can see there's all these planes in here. If I hide these planes, if I just hide this, you can see it's actually pretty much like baked in sunlight. Just the whole thing is just completely cooked in it. And that is obviously not as nice as what we have with all these nice shadows in here. So you can do this if you want, but it does look kind of cool, but it's a bit much, right? So I prefer to do this kind of dramatic style of lighting where we intentionally cast shadows by just placing objects in the way of the sunlight and just trying to basically get the lighting right with one main light and then subtract with different shadows, and that'll just leave these interesting spots, and you can really do a lot of cool stuff by blocking out certain areas that you don't want as much attention to go towards, or that you feel should have more contrast or feel should be darker, and just leaving those important or interesting areas in the light. And it doesn't have to be important or interesting areas, but just areas that just happen to look cool with spots of sunlight. And it could be completely random too. That sometimes looks cool as well. So what this is, what's casting the shadows, is this right here. So if I just go over here and look at this, we have these planes over here. So the sun's back here shining in the direction this camera is looking right now, kind of down that way. And in the way of the sunlight are all these different planes, which just basically have a bunch of random holes in them. So the way I'm doing that is just a noise texture node that's running through a color ramp. So we're taking the black and moving that up, and then taking the white and moving that down, and just ramming the contrast into that middle portion right there, and just increasing the contrast. So it's some of it's like fully transparent and some of it's almost fully opaque and not letting any light through. And then what that is doing is it's running into the alpha, aka like the transparency of that plane, that surface right here. And that gives you this kind of look where it's just like I can't really isolate it without the sun lamp here. It's basically just a plane that's blocking certain areas, and we're kind of simulating what really dramatic clouds would do, I guess. And so I didn't just do one. I got one and I kind of lined it up right, and then I duplicated it, and it just happened to look better the more times that I duplicated it, and just kind of just moved it around until it happened to look right. That's kind of my strategy here, is just move it around, try it. If you don't like it, just move it around a little bit, rotate it, play with the scale of the noise, and just do that until you get something that you're happy with. And so that's what I'm doing there. And then obviously that has to match the rest of the environment, mainly like things like the background. So the background, I tried a few different skies here. This is just a sky image running into the base color. Actually doesn't matter if I take that out. Oh, I guess it kind of does a little bit because the sun's shining on it. But in most scenes, it's just the alpha and the base color with the emission strength turned up. That's what you have to worry about. And you just basically have an image plane of a sky in the back. That's pretty much what I do for skies almost every single time. And so that image has to match the mood that you have with the lighting. Getting those two things to work together is often tricky, but once you get it right, it'll make the whole scene feel like it's meant to be there and it fits together. And the lighting actually works much better when it matches the background you have. So I think that's everything I wanted to cover in this one. By the way, I did actually record myself creating this full environment from start to finish. And you could download the blend file too if you want. It's in the paid fantasy environments course that I put out last month. So if you want to just get this blend file, get the asset pack with all these different models that comes with it, you can get that below. And if you want to see me create this render from scratch, that's of course in there as well. So anyways, thank you for watching. I'll see you in some other video. And yeah, hopefully this was useful. Bye.